Skirmish wargaming's a bit of a fad, really. It's a bit of a trend. It's in fashion at the moment, but it's not really proper wargaming, is it? It's not like having a lovely big table laid out with hundreds of figures. Then again, skirmish wargaming's fun. It can bring new people into the hobby, and you don't need a lot of investment in order to set the skirmish game up. Yes, skirmish versus battles. Which one's going to win? Well, today on Dragon's Teeth, we're going to find out. Hi folks, I'm Rob Poynton. Thanks for joining me today for this chat about skirmish games versus big war games. Seems to be a bit of a topic of conversation at the moment, and this was really prompted by two things. As you may know, if you're a regular on the channel, I'm currently working on my own set of skirmish rules, We Want the Gold, due to be published hopefully in the next month or so. A little more about that later on. And one of the prompts was Matt at Bedford Gladiators saying to me, in all earnestness, there's loads of skirmish rules out. Why on earth are you publishing another set? And it's a very good question, and I will answer it. The second thing was the latest podcast from Ken of Yorkshire Gamers. Ken was looking through the current crop of wargaming magazines that we have, reviewing them, and one thing that came across very strongly was that Ken doesn't like skirmish games. Now, one thing you can be sure of with a Yorkshireman is always going to let you know what he thinks. And I know this because a very good friend of mine, Dave Nicholson, who I used to work with a lot, I used to go and see him up in the wonderfully named Goole in Yorkshire, and he used to come down to London to see us as well. And I always remember we were out for a drink one night in London, and someone said to him, where are you from then? Where are you from then, mate? And Dave, puffed his chest out. He's only 5'2", bless him, and went, Yorkshire. And the bloke said, oh, which part? He goes, fucking all of me. I thought it was such a great line. So, yes, Ken's very forthright in his views, and one of those views is he doesn't like skirmish games. So this got me to thinking, because Ken is absolutely right, and Matt as well, there's a huge amount of skirmish games around at the moment. It seems that something's released every week. And probably the biggest proliferation of games I see down at Bedford on a Monday, and even a Sunday as well come to that, are skirmish games. So, what's going on? Now, I've spoken about my history with war games a couple of times on the channel, my war games origin story, and it was, funnily enough, a skirmish game that got me started. This was mid-70s. We had a history teacher at school who did an after-school session with a gladiatorial combat game, biscuit tin, grid paper, minifigs. Wow, this is amazing. That spurred a few of us to get together, and we formed Ilford War Games Group, which is still going today. Now, first of all, we were using the church hall opposite the school, or just next to the school. So we were doing the standard 6x4. So that gladiatorial game was a skirmish game, and I would say the main period that we were working in the club was Second World War. There was a little bit of Napoleonics, and there was Middle-earth fantasy battles. Now, my primary interest was World War II initially, because of course I had all the Airfix kits and all the rest of it. And I would say, and I'd say even to this day, if you're playing World War II on a 6x4 table in 1/72 in old money or 28mm in new money, you're doing a skirmish game. Because to me, on that size table, you have maybe 3 tanks aside, might have 3 Shermans against a Tiger and a Stug, perhaps a platoon of infantry, something like that, 30 or so figures. That's generally what you're working with. Now, of course, there's no law that says you have to do that, and I've seen 6x4 games with maybe 20 tanks on each side. To me, I prefer to have less tanks and a little bit more manoeuvring than everything else. So you could say that initially I started with a skirmish game, and then I went into a larger skirmish game. However, things moved on. As the club developed and grew, we had a guy came in who ran his own print business, Small World had actually bought it off an uncle of mine a few years before. For anyone who knows Ilford, this was down by the old Ilford Recorder offices opposite the swimming baths, and the upshot of that was the printing works was there, the upper floor was unused. So because he owned the company, he basically moved us in to the upper floor, which was a very large space. We had some tables made up, 8x6 and all this kind of stuff. And the supreme beauty of that setup was we could leave everything there, everything in place. It was locked when we weren't there. No one else used it. No one had any reason to go in there. So I think in that sense, I was a bit spoilt. And, you know, like most things, especially at that age, you sort of take it for granted. So we started setting up these huge battles. The Napoleonics really took off at the club during that time. We got into our Second World War. Now we had more players. We could have larger sides. And something else that happened then, we switched from 1/72nd to 1/300th. So now you're getting into serious tank battles, right? When we finished the game on whatever night it was, we didn't have to pack anything away. We didn't have to finish the game. We could carry on a couple of nights later or the next week or whatever. So yeah, that was a real luxury. And of course, with that luxury, things began to grow and spread out. And I remember games of 4 or 5 people aside, huge long tables that probably took like 3 or 4 sessions to complete. So in terms of large-scale historical wargaming, this was it. And this really points to the 2 main factors, well, 3 main factors. I've just gone Spanish Inquisition. Let's start with the 2 main factors, which are time and space. If you want to do a large-scale historical battle in 28mm, then 6x4, maybe, you know, you're really looking at 8x6, perhaps even larger. So you've got to have the space and the setup for that. Then you've got to have the time, not only to play the game, but also to get everything set up. Now, Bedford Gladiators on a Monday runs from 7 till 11, so that's 4 hours. I run my Tai Chi class on a Monday night from 6 to 7. So for an hour, I'm going slow motion. Then it's a quick dash, a quick drive across town to the club. I normally get there about 7:15. So already my time is being eaten into. Of course, if other people are there, they can start setting the terrain up. But basically, 4 hours is just about enough time to get what I'd call a small size battle done. A skirmish game, a small size battle. You're certainly not going to be doing the Arnhem offensive or a part of the Battle of the Bulge or whatever it is in the 3 hours that you have once you take out your setting up and putting away time as well. Now, Sundays is a little different because on the last Sunday of month at the Gladiators we have all day Sunday, so that goes from 12 through into the evening, so you've potentially got 8 hours there, or maybe even a little bit more, to set the game up, get everything finished, get everything packed away. And another good thing about the Gladiators is we can store terrain and scenery and figures there. There's a nice upstairs area, so you know you don't have to cart boxes of things backwards and forwards constantly. And this brings me on to the third issue, which is figures, your armies. I've got 4 boxes in the cupboard over there. Each holds 200 figures, and they are pretty much full with my old 28mm Middle-earth armies. Mostly minifigs and some other bits and pieces, Citadel and whatever. So if you want to put on a big Middle-earth battle, I've got a few figures, you know. But again, that took me a long time to build that up back in the day. And now, unfortunately, some of those figures haven't aged so well. And of course, over time, a lot of spears have broken off and all this kind of stuff. Plus, the other issue you have, if you want to get a lot of figures to build a big army, is what rule system you're using, what's your basing. So it's great to think I'm going to build a particular army from history. Let's go with the Spartans, say. I buy 400 figures, I paint them up, and I base them on, I don't know, 80mm by 40mm bases, for example. I put them all in place, I get down the club, and someone says, oh yeah, the rules we're using, your bases need to be 60mm by 30mm. I know you can get movement trays and all that kind of stuff now, but it is something you have to consider. if you're building an army, what rule set are you using? What is the basing size going to be? Aside from all that, of course, there's the expense and the time spent painting, or if you pay someone else to paint them for you, there's extra expense. You know, you could spend weeks painting up a large army in order to get ready for the table. And the other side of that, of course, is you've got to put other stuff on the table as well in terms of terrain. Now, that might be quite simple depending on the period you've chosen. Most ancient battles I've played have very little terrain, some hills, a river, you know, a forest maybe. That's pretty much it. As you come up through history, of course, that's going to change. And once you get into the 20th century in particular, then you're looking at villages, towns, railways, and all the rest of it. Now, for me personally, I enjoy building terrain and painting it as much as I enjoy painting figures. That's a very interesting part of the hobby for me. But now, as well as your 4 boxes of figures, you've got another 4 boxes of terrain to carry around as well. Having said all of that, I still like to see a proper, to borrow Ken's term, a proper War Games layout. And when I go to shows like Partisan or Salute, or I see things online or in magazines, you know, it does warm the old cockles of the heart to see an 8x6 table with formations of nicely painted figures. Now, one thing I found is 10mm. When I got back into the hobby, I was a 28mm guy back in the day with 1/300th, but the discovery of 10mm, and I think the advent of 3D printing has helped with this as well. I started buying amazing 10mm figures, and they're just as finely detailed as 28mm, which doesn't help when I'm painting, especially now the old eyesight's going. But yeah, with 10mm, even on a 6x4, you can get a mass of figures on the table that looks like an army. Consequently, of course, the terrain is shrunk down, so houses are now this big, rivers are this wide. You can pretty much get all the terrain in one box. So I suppose in that sense, it's become a little bit easier to do your large scale game. And there is part of me that agrees with Ken, yeah, that's proper wargaming. But let's think now about the skirmish game. So what do we mean by a skirmish game? I guess, you know, the definition can be a little bit fuzzy around the edges, but I'd say a game where a player is in control of maybe 5 up to 50 or so figures. Anything larger than that is perhaps a small battle. Depends largely on the rules and everything else. But let's stick with that at the moment. Each player controls a small amount of figures, and you're probably playing on a 6x4 or even a 4x4, or even, as I mentioned in a minute, sort of 2x2. Yeah, okay. Now, it means you have to have less figures, of course. So you can go out and buy 5 figures and paint them up very quickly. Not a big expense. In terms of terrain, it depends. Well, even if you're doing ancients, you might be doing something semi-mythical, like Jason and the Argonauts, for example. I've seen a very nice game with Jason and his crew fighting the skeletons, of course, that iconic Harryhausen scene. So in that case, you've got to have certain items of scenery. You need the ruined temple, you need some rocky outcrops, you need some trees. So I think in terms of terrain, the demands for skirmish are not really that different. It's just that everything tends to be drawn in a little more because your characters are working round and through this terrain. And obviously it can have an impact on how your characters react. They can use it in terms of cover. They might be climbing up things, all this sort of stuff that you don't see so much in a large scale battle. And that of course points to the next characteristic of the skirmish game, which is it feels much more personal. If you're in charge of 800 troops, you're the general. You stand godlike above the table, and you say, you move there, and you move there, and you do this. Hopefully, they obey. Not always, right? When you're playing a skirmish game, you're more down on the table. In fact, you might even have a figure representing yourself. It could be just you. You might just have one figure. What you tend to then get in skirmishes is each figure will have its own characteristics and traits rather than a unit of 150 troops or whatever having their trait. So we get a little bit more into the realm of RPG. Now, ironically enough, One reason that We Want the Gold came about when I originally ran these games, because I used to run this back in the, I guess it was early 80s, late 70s, early 80s was where the roots of that game lie. At that time, we had tabletoppers and role players, and very rarely did the two meet. Myself and a couple of others, we straddled that fence. Quite painful, makes your eyes water. So, in a way, the skirmish game that I developed, and which was to become We Want the Gold, was a tabletop game with RPG elements. It was a way, I didn't really plan it as such at the time, but looking back, it was a way of bringing tabletop players into role playing and vice versa. So I think then that is one of the strengths of the skirmish game. You don't even have to have any figures to join in, of course, quite often the person who's organising the game on a Monday night will bring the figures and the pieces and everything else down. So the figures are all there provided. You don't even have to do that. Very easy access to get into. Now, the mechanics of a skirmish game can be as simple or as complex as a large-scale battle. So that's not generally an issue for bringing new people in. But I think having that character element does encourage people who may not be so interested in the finer points of history and what musket did what and what was the range of the Pak-40. Could it penetrate the armour of a T-34 at 600 yards, that kind of stuff. But, here you are. You've got a character. You're hacking your way through the undergrowth. It opens out into a clearing. There's 6 orcs opposite. What are you going to do? So say it does bring that RPG or narrative element in as well. And this brings me back to answer Matt's question. Why the bloody hell are you bringing out another set of skirmish rules? Because if you like, the USP of We Want the Gold is the fact that it isn't one side versus another. Each player, each faction has their own aims and objectives, which may coincide with another's. They may overlap. They may, in some cases, mean that those factions work together. In other cases, it might mean that they're going to be opposed, or they might double cross each other. So it's very much about building this narrative setup. I referenced Jason and the Argonauts earlier. That kind of thing is the template for the game. You might have 3 or 4 groups of characters in a particular situation, and they're all after something. I sort of think of it like it's the final scene of one of those movies, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that sort of thing. It's the final battle scene. Those, for me, are the strong points of the skirmish game. Easy to get into. You've got that sense of character and narrative. Generally speaking, you're going to finish within a few hours. I think the last game of We Want the Gold we played, we took just under 4 hours. We got a satisfactory resolution. Everything was packed away by 11 o'clock. Job done. Now, having said all that, I think there's a downside to skirmish games as well. And this is my own personal opinion. I don't want to upset or offend anyone. Well, not too much. I think there has been a crossover where you get skirmish games that are presented as board games with figures. This isn't always bad. Matt brought in the Conan game. Was it the Monolith game? Can't quite remember the title now. But that is played on a board and you have figures. I enjoyed that. It's kind of a skirmish game, I suppose, in a lot of ways, but there's this board game element as well. However, there was another game that I played, which was from a certain company, shall we put it like that. It only lasted, I think it's 3 or 4 turns. That's not because of the way we played it. Those are the rules. It just lasts for, might have even just been 3 turns. It actually took longer for Matt to explain the rules to me and digest than it did to play. But this sort of skirmish game, to me, this is where your marketing comes in, because this is where you get your nice shiny box. You go into the shop, maybe with your mum and dad, you know how this works, and there's this nice shiny box with everything in it. You've got some figures, you've got loads of cards, you've got tokens, you've got special dice, you've got a little chart that goes on the side, you've got a fold-out board. Basically, that's it. Everything you need is in that box, at least to play the basic game, right? Because I'm sure there's going to be expansions and all the rest of it. So, again, as a way of introducing young people into the hobby, I think that's fine. It's great. It's the gateway. It can get them in. From there, they might move into RPG, they might move into historical, who knows. But I think once you get that bug for playing this kind of thing, it tends to stick around. The downside of that is that potentially, perhaps, the hobby can become diluted. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but we'll stick with that for the moment. Games become something that, we've only got a couple of hours, let's do this. There's not a lot of thought goes into it. There's no research goes into it. There's none of these other benefits of the hobby, I think. You get your research, your painting, you're making your terrain, all that stuff disappears. And it's a bit like, back in the old days, me and my brother and my mum and dad, Saturday night, let's get Cluedo out or Monopoly. That kind of level of thing, which was very fun and enjoyable at the time. But, playing Monopoly didn't turn me into a greedy capitalist. So perhaps the analogy is not so good. But I do feel that type of game, and this is something I said to Matt about that game I referenced earlier, you've got all these cards with statistics and everything else, and it felt to me more like another childhood memory, Top Trumps. Now, Top Trumps, you may remember, if you're of a similar vintage to myself, you get your deck of cards, and it could be helicopters, aeroplanes, motorcycles, football teams, pretty much anything where you had statistics. And you say, right, my motorbike has got a top speed of 110 miles an hour. Oh, mine's only 90. Okay, I take that car. Very simple setup, but endlessly fascinating to people who are into statistics and lists. In other words, most wargamers. However, that was as far as that game went. So I do feel there is this danger, trend perhaps, of turning war games into that kind of experience. Now, no one's forcing anyone to do anything, of course. But as we know, what will happen is that the market will dictate where the attention and where the money goes. If that kind of skirmish game in a box is what sells more than anything else, then that's where the advertising is going to go. That's where the main focus of the gaming media is going to go, which is something that Ken brought up in his podcast as well. Of course, I've edited magazines myself. Within your particular subject, you're going to put out what you think people are interested in. You might put out some really obscure stuff that appeals to 4 readers. No one else is going to buy the magazine. So I get that it's a difficult balance, but at the same time, I don't think we should lose sight of that large-scale historical or even fantasy battle, because some people treat Middle Earth as real history, the amounts of scholarship that goes on, but we shouldn't lose track of that large-scale historical battle where everything is researched, and if it is representing an actual historical battle, there's an awful lot of work, no doubt, has gone into making that game as realistic as possible in terms of the conditions, the numbers of the troops, the formations, the terrain and everything else, in order to give the players the closest possible experience to Napoleon or Wellington or Ney or whoever. I don't know, maybe it's similar to computer games, where some people will play Tetris, some first-person shooter, other people, I remember at Elite when it first came out, we all went round to my mate's house to watch, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's a ZX Spectrum, can't remember, but that sort of thing. And we went round there to watch his spaceship fly through the cosmos from planet to planet for about an hour. That was literally it, just a starfield on the screen. And we thought this was great. It's like that. So, whatever you're looking for, I suppose the good thing is you can now find in computer gaming or in wargaming. Be that board game with figures, be that skirmish gaming, be it a full-on historical campaign covering the whole of Waterloo from soup to nuts, everything is there available for you. But of course, you're going to need the time and the resources and the other players who share that interest in order to be able to do it as well. I have been lucky with that in that the Bane Wars campaign, phase 1 was successful, and we are starting up phase 2 of that. So this is another thing for me. I do enjoy that large scale battle. I do enjoy it even more if there's that narrative. One of the best ways to get a narrative in your large scale games is to run a campaign. Now that's a whole another set of issues and potential problems. See, wargaming is often about problem solving. So if you want to follow that, then check out the Bane Wars playlist. Part 1 is already finished. There's a whole rundown of that on a few episodes. So we're just starting into part 2. And someone emailed me the other day and asked, he was thinking of setting up a campaign himself, was asking about the sort of rules that I'm using. I'm drawing from Tony Bath and some other sources. And I did say that at some point, when I finish my other books, I will put all these together and I'll look at publishing the Bane Wars campaign guide. So that'll be the background, the lore, but also the mechanics of how the campaign is run. And with that, you're definitely going to be having some large-scale battles. All right, that's it for today. As always, I'm very interested in hearing your feedback. Do you enjoy skirmish games? Do you think that's not proper wargaming? Do you always go for the big game? How does that work out in terms of time and space and everything else? Or do you think, like me, there's room for everyone and everything as long as we don't lose sight of the core of what wargaming is? As always, if you haven't already, please do click the subscribe, like and share buttons below. Thanks to everyone who's subscribed so far. Do keep your comments coming in, much appreciated. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the battlefield.